ever seen a photo of someone, then met them in person, been totally amazed at the difference because the photo's been digitally enhanced and doesn't show the real person? They've tried to make themselves look younger or slimmer or simply different. Have you ever been tempted by a picture or a description of a meal in a restaurant, then been disappointed at the food on your plate? The exotic side salad that turns out to be a lettuce leaf with a slice of tomato on it. Or the sumptuous pie filled with a mouth-watering steak that actually presents as mushy gravy with the odd piece of chewy meat. Or have you followed a recipe in a cookbook, only to realise that you haven't actually got those skills that Mary Berry has, or the cooking ability of Jamie Oliver, and you definitely don't have those unheard of staple spices in your normal cupboard? Or how about sitting down with the children to do an activity or a craft in a game that promises hours of endless fun? And when you open it up, you realise that you've got to go out and get half of the things that make it possible. Things aren't always what they seem, are they? I'm not sure how many of you have got a Facebook page. Some of you no doubt have, while others wouldn't go near it with the proverbial barge pole. But for those of you who do, how often do you change your profile picture? How often do you look to see how many likes you've got? Caught in popularity at every turn. In our current society, being liked, looking good, is so often so important that they overshadow everything else. The first couple of times I recorded services for use online, I spent so much time stressing about what I looked like, what was in the background, where it was going and how I was doing it, that it overshadowed for me what I was trying to actually achieve. You'll probably note today that I've not spent too much time on the looks and I'm simply recording my message. So imagine, if you will, a challenge to design a profile picture for a Facebook page, or an advertising feature for a newsletter for your chapel or your church. What would it be? Perhaps a lovely modern building, or an old-fashioned traditional building in a picturesque setting. Photos perhaps of the activities that you're likely to do, or of the people. Perhaps you'd change it regularly to keep up with the latest trends or the seasons. Then when you've completed your profile or your advert, what would you say about it? Who are we aiming to communicate with? What activities are we focused on? What are the important issues in our community and what are we going to do about it? And then consider the relationship between the two. Is our profile picture fit for purpose? Does it reflect our aim, our brand? Or would Jesus say that we're too busy trying to look good, that we've lost sight of what we're actually doing and where we're going? How can we make sure that the profile we present is in reality the same as the message we aim to portray? How do we make sure that the image we try to show to the outside world and to the community is a reality, is what we are and what we're about? Jesus challenged the false facade of some of the Pharisees, in particular their love of the law, their zealousness to achieve status and privilege. He criticised their hypocrisy because their teachings and their lifestyles weren't integrated. They liked to be recognised for their own piety, for their good deeds. But in reality, they were only seeking to enhance their own status and prestige. Another story about the imbalance of power. Power from the religious leaders, as they belittled and ridiculed those who didn't live up to their own false standards. Power from religious leaders who expected others to toe the party line, but failed to do so themselves. Jesus exposed these hypocritical attitudes. The religious leaders knew all the scriptures, but they didn't live by them. They didn't care about being holy, just about looking holy, in order to court admiration and praise for their obvious devotion. Today there are many people who know the Bible, but don't let it change their way of life. There are many people who claim to follow Jesus, but don't live to his exacting standards of love. It's dangerous when love of the position overshadows the love of God and living in his ways. It's perhaps a sober message to us today to look at our own lifestyles and address the false identities we may have assumed as individuals or as churches. Jesus points to our one true identity in God's presence. Our true calling is to be humble servants in his presence and to follow only his teachings and his example. He reminds us how difficult it is to be true to our own feelings and to be willing to stand up and be counted, especially when we're up against those in power or authority who may have different views to our own. Jesus calls us to be honest living, being honest about ourselves and with ourselves, putting only his way of life at the centre of all that we do, setting aside selective truths and alternative facts, forgetting the hustle and bustle of meetings, rushing from place to place, setting aside good intentions and a promise of I'll do it tomorrow. He expects us to promote action, social justice in all that we do in his name. Over the past few months, our lives have been forced in a different direction to the one we may have chosen. Many of us have adopted a quieter pace of life. Many of us no longer have to rush round in the morning to be ready to get in the car or catch the train. And instead we amble around at our own pace, to a space of comfort, often with coffee in hand and still wearing our slippers. We log on to the next meeting. A way of life that's changed dramatically. For some, we stay at home more. Others go out to work. But sanitising and masking become part of the new routine wherever we go and whenever we go, so that we keep ourselves and others safe. We've learnt what 2 metres look like. We've learnt how to minimise contact. We've learnt to look at things in a different way. But perhaps these last few months have also opened our eyes to the needs of others, the demands on the food bank, the Samaritans, the need for lunches for children in the school holidays, the work of the mental health team that's been increasing. In our own communities, we've stood alongside our neighbours. We've clapped for the NHS. We've talked to people who live on the street. We've probably never even noticed them before. We've stepped aside and acknowledged the stranger as they've walked past. We've shared experiences and pain. And so often, in so many ways, we've come together as a community. Living alongside our neighbour, we're sharing their burden, experiencing their pain, and searching for ways to offer support to one another. Last week we were reminded to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul and mind, and to love your neighbour as yourself. This week Jesus picks up the same thread, telling us that as true people of God, we will follow in his ways of loving and his ways of living. Jesus, the Son of God, humbled himself to be a servant to others. And that's how he wants us to live, justly and humbly, serving the community in which we live in any way that we can. As we live alongside our neighbours, we share their burdens and their pain. We see their needs and we work to address them, speaking out for those in need and supporting them in whatever way we can. Jesus challenges the norm of society. To him, true greatness doesn't come from social standing, riches, or status, but from serving those in need, giving of self to honour God by helping others. Not simply to get our names in the Barnsley Chronicle, not simply to be put forward for a Pride of Barnsley award, but simply to humble ourselves in service, service to others, service that keeps us aware of the needs of others and stops us focusing on ourselves. Jesus came to be a servant to people, to be humbled and so inspire greatness. What sort of greatness do you seek? Your own or God's? Amen.